Hello and welcome. Today, I will whisper to you about the incredible artists and innovations of the Renaissance period. So, get comfortable, relax, and let's explore this fascinating era together. The Renaissance, beginning in the late 14th century in Europe, was a time of extraordinary cultural rebirth. It marked the revival of classical learning, art, and philosophy after the long medieval period. Artists during this time were not only creators of beauty but also pioneers who transformed the way people viewed the world. They pushed the boundaries of artistic expression, experimented with new techniques, and laid the foundation for the modern world. From the vibrant frescoes of Michelangelo to the meticulous studies of Leonardo da Vinci, Renaissance artists brought human emotion, nature, and science to life in ways that had never been seen before. Their works were deeply connected to the intellectual currents of their time, with a profound focus on humanism, individualism, and the rediscovery of classical antiquity. As we journey through the lives and innovations of these legendary figures, you'll discover how their contributions shaped the world of art, science, and culture in ways that continue to resonate even today. So, let's dive into the Renaissance and meet the artists who defined an era. Let's begin with one of the most remarkable figures of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci. You've probably heard his name many times, but there's so much more to him than just being the painter of the famous Mona Lisa. Leonardo was a true Renaissance man, a polymath whose talents and interests spanned across a vast range of fields. He wasn't just a painter, he was an inventor, a scientist, an engineer, an anatomist, a musician, and a philosopher. His mind was one that could never rest, always curious, always seeking new knowledge and understanding of the world around him. Born on April 15, 1452, in the town of Vinci, near Florence, Leonardo was the illegitimate son of a notary, Piero da Vinci, and a peasant woman, Caterina. Despite his illegitimate status, Leonardo was brought up in his father's household and had access to a decent education. From an early age, Leonardo demonstrated an intense curiosity about nature and an extraordinary talent for drawing. His father recognized his potential and arranged for him to be apprenticed to Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most prominent artists in Florence at the time. It was here, in Verrocchio's workshop, that Leonardo began his formal artistic training, learning not only painting but also sculpture, metalworking, and the basics of mechanical engineering. Even as an apprentice, Leonardo showed signs of his exceptional talent. There's a famous story that during the creation of Verrocchio's painting The Baptism of Christ, Leonardo was tasked with painting one of the angels. According to legend, his work was so superior to his master's that Verrocchio vowed never to paint again. Whether or not this story is true, it highlights the remarkable skill Leonardo possessed even at a young age. But Leonardo's genius extended far beyond the realm of art. He was deeply interested in how the world worked, and he sought to understand it through observation and experimentation. He was a meticulous observer of nature, studying the way light played on objects, how water flowed, and how plants grew. He kept detailed notebooks filled with sketches, diagrams, and observations on subjects ranging from anatomy to astronomy. These notebooks, which were never published during his lifetime, reveal a mind that was constantly exploring, constantly questioning. Leonardo's scientific curiosity greatly influenced his art. He believed that in order to paint the human body accurately, he needed to understand its structure. To this end, he dissected human cadavers, studying the muscles, bones, and organs in great detail. His anatomical drawings are some of the most accurate ever produced, and they continue to be admired for their precision and beauty. These studies not only helped him create lifelike figures in his paintings, but also contributed to the broader understanding of human anatomy during the Renaissance. Perhaps the most famous of Leonardo's works is the Mona Lisa, a painting that has captivated audiences for centuries. Painted between 1503 and 1506, the Mona Lisa is renowned for its enigmatic smile, which seems to change depending on the angle from which you view it. The soft, almost blurred edges of the figure, a technique known as sfumato, create an illusion of depth and realism that was revolutionary at the time. But what is it about this painting that has made it one of the most famous in history? Part of its appeal lies in the mystery surrounding the subject's identity. Some believe she was Lisa Girardini, the wife of a wealthy merchant, while others suggest that the portrait may be a self-representation of Leonardo himself. Whatever the truth may be, the Mona Lisa continues to intrigue art lovers and historians alike. Another of Leonardo's masterpieces is The Last Supper, painted between 1495 and 1498 on the wall of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan. This mural depicts the moment when Jesus tells his disciples that one of them will betray him. Leonardo masterfully captured the emotional intensity of the scene, with each disciple reacting in a unique way to the shocking news. The use of perspective in the painting draws the viewer's eye to the figure of Jesus, who is placed at the center of the composition. Despite the fact that The Last Supper has suffered significant damage over the centuries, partly due to Leonardo's experimental technique, it remains one of the most iconic images in Western art. But Leonardo was much more than just a painter. He was a visionary thinker whose ideas and inventions were far ahead of his time. In his notebooks, he sketched designs for flying machines, tanks, and even early versions of a helicopter. He studied the mechanics of flight by observing birds and created designs for wings and gliders. Though none of these inventions were built during his lifetime, they demonstrate his deep understanding of engineering and his boundless imagination. Leonardo also applied his scientific knowledge to solve practical problems, designing machines for construction, military defense, and irrigation. One of Leonardo's most famous drawings, The Vitruvian Man, is a perfect example of how he combined art and science. This drawing, which shows a man in two superimposed positions with his arms and legs outstretched inside a square and a circle, is based on the work of the Roman architect Vitruvius, who believed that the proportions of the human body were a reflection of the universe's divine harmony. Leonardo's interpretation of Vitruvius's ideas goes beyond simple geometry. It embodies his belief that the human body was a microcosm of the natural world, and that understanding it was key to understanding the universe itself. Despite his many talents and accomplishments, Leonardo was known for his perfectionism and his tendency to leave projects unfinished. His restless mind was always moving on to the next idea, the next experiment. This often frustrated his patrons, who were eager for him to complete the commissions they had paid for. But for Leonardo, the process of exploration and discovery was more important than the finished product. He was constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible, whether in art or science. In the later years of his life, Leonardo moved to France, where he was invited by King Francis I to live and work at the royal court. The king was a great admirer of Leonardo and treated him with great respect, providing him with a comfortable home at the Château du Clos-Luz near Amboise. It was here, in this peaceful setting, that Leonardo spent the last years of his life, continuing to work on his scientific studies and sketches, though he produced few major works of art during this time. He passed away on May 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire artists, scientists, and thinkers to this day. Leonardo da Vinci's genius lay in his ability to merge art, science, and technology in a way that was unprecedented. His works, both artistic and scientific, are a testament to the power of curiosity and creativity. He was a man who saw no boundaries between disciplines, who believed that the pursuit of knowledge was the greatest goal of human life. Today, more than 500 years after his death, we continue to be fascinated by his works and inspired by his endless quest to understand the world. Next, let's talk about another towering figure of the Renaissance, Michelangelo Buonarroti. While Leonardo da Vinci may be known for his intellectual curiosity and wide-ranging interests, Michelangelo is celebrated for his unparalleled skill as a sculptor, painter, and architect. He is often regarded as one of the greatest artists in history, and his works have come to define the very essence of Renaissance art. Michelangelo was born on March 6, 1475, in Caprese, a small village in the region of Tuscany. Unlike Leonardo, who was raised in relative comfort, Michelangelo's early life was more humble. His mother died when he was just 6 years old, and his father, who struggled to provide for the family, sent Michelangelo to live with a stonecutter and his wife. This unusual upbringing had a profound effect on Michelangelo, who later said that from his earliest memories, he was surrounded by the sound of hammers and chisels. Perhaps this is where his lifelong passion for sculpture began. At the age of 13, Michelangelo became an apprentice to the painter Domenico Ghirlandaio in Florence. However, it quickly became clear that painting wasn't Michelangelo's true calling. His heart was in sculpture. He soon left Ghirlandaio's workshop and began studying sculpture under the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici, one of the most powerful and influential figures in Florence. It was during this time that Michelangelo began to develop the skills that would later make him famous. One of Michelangelo's earliest masterpieces is the Pieta, a sculpture of the Virgin Mary cradling the body of Jesus after his crucifixion. Created when he was just 24 years old, the Pieta is remarkable not only for its technical perfection but also for the deep emotion it conveys. The delicacy of Mary's face, the intricate folds of her robe, and the lifeless form of Jesus lying in her lap, each detail is crafted with such precision and care that the sculpture seems almost lifelike. The Pieta quickly established Michelangelo as one of the most talented sculptors of his generation. But Michelangelo's most famous work is undoubtedly his colossal statue of David, which he completed in 1504. Standing over 14 feet tall, the statue of David is a symbol of strength, beauty, and human potential. Carved from a single block of marble, Michelangelo's David depicts the biblical hero at the moment before his battle with Goliath. Unlike earlier depictions of David, which showed him triumphant after slaying the giant, Michelangelo chose to portray David in a moment of tense concentration, his body coiled with energy, ready for action. Every muscle, every tendon, every detail of the human form is rendered with incredible accuracy, making David one of the most celebrated sculptures in art history. What's even more impressive is that Michelangelo worked on the David alone, without the assistance of any apprentices or helpers. He spent over 2 years chiseling away at the marble block, and the result is nothing short of astonishing. The statue was originally intended to be placed high on the facade of Florence's cathedral, but when it was finished, the city leaders were so impressed that they decided to place it in a prominent public square instead. Today, a replica of David stands in the Piazza della Signoria, while the original is housed in the Galleria dell'Accademia in Florence. Michelangelo's talents were not limited to sculpture, however. In 1508, Pope Julius II commissioned him to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, a task that would become one of the defining achievements of his career. Michelangelo was initially reluctant to take on the project, as he considered himself primarily a sculptor, not a painter. But once he accepted the commission, he threw himself into the work with his characteristic intensity. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, completed between 1508 and 1512, is one of the most extraordinary works of art ever created. The ceiling depicts scenes from the Book of Genesis, including the famous creation of Adam, in which God reaches out to touch the hand of Adam, giving him the spark of life. The scale of the project was immense. Michelangelo painted over 300 figures on the ceiling, each one carefully designed and executed. He worked in difficult conditions, lying on his back on scaffolding high above the chapel floor for months at a time. The physical toll of the work was significant, and Michelangelo later described the experience as grueling, but the result was nothing short of a masterpiece. The creation of Adam, in particular, has become one of the most iconic images in Western art. The powerful gesture of God reaching out to Adam has been interpreted in countless ways, symbolizing everything from the relationship between humanity and the divine to the transmission of creativity and knowledge. Michelangelo's ability to convey such profound themes through the human form is a testament to his genius. After completing the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Michelangelo continued to work for the papacy, taking on numerous architectural and sculptural commissions. One of his most significant contributions was his work on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, where he designed the massive dome that still dominates the city's skyline. Michelangelo took over the project in the later years of his life, and although he did not live to see the dome completed, his designs ensured that it would become one of the most recognizable structures in the world. Despite his extraordinary success, Michelangelo was known for his solitary and somewhat difficult personality. He was deeply religious and often struggled with the tension between his spiritual beliefs and his desire to create art that celebrated the human form. This inner conflict is evident in much of his work, which often juxtaposes the beauty and power of the human body with themes of suffering, redemption, and divine grace. Michelangelo lived to the age of 88, an incredible feat for someone in the Renaissance era. In his later years, he continued to work tirelessly, often on multiple projects at once. Even as an old man, he maintained his reputation as one of the greatest artists of his time, and his influence on the art world was immeasurable. He passed away in 1564, leaving behind a legacy that would shape the course of Western art for centuries to come. Michelangelo's work embodies the spirit of the Renaissance, the belief in the potential of the human mind and body, the celebration of beauty and creativity, and the pursuit of excellence in all things. His sculptures, paintings, and architectural designs remain some of the most admired and studied works in the history of art, a testament to his extraordinary talent and vision. Now, let's move on to another key figure of the Renaissance, Raphael, or Raffaello Sanzio, as he was born. If Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were known for their innovation and intensity, Raphael is often celebrated for his grace, harmony, and elegance. His works are admired for their clarity of form, ease of composition, and visual balance, making him one of the great masters of the High Renaissance. Raphael was born on April 6, 1483, in Urbino, a small but culturally rich city. His father, Giovanni Santi, was a court painter to the Duke of Urbino, so Raphael was exposed to the world of art from a very young age. Sadly, his mother died when he was just 8, and his father followed soon after. Orphaned as a child, Raphael inherited his father's workshop and quickly began to display a remarkable artistic talent. Even as a teenager, Raphael's skills were already recognized by the local artistic community. At the age of 17, Raphael traveled to Perugia to apprentice with the painter Pietro Perugino, one of the most important artists of the time. It was here that Raphael developed the delicate style that would come to define his work. He learned how to use soft colors, balanced compositions, and graceful figures, all hallmarks of Perugino's style. However, Raphael's genius was that he didn't simply imitate his teacher, he took these elements and refined them, creating a style that was uniquely his own. One of Raphael's early masterpieces is The Marriage of the Virgin, painted in 1504. This painting, which depicts the marriage of the Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph, is a perfect example of Raphael's early style. The composition is symmetrical and balanced, with the figures arranged in a harmonious way that guides the viewer's eye toward the central event. The architectural setting in the background, with its perfect perspective, shows Raphael's mastery of spatial composition, a skill he would continue to refine throughout his career. But it wasn't long before Raphael felt the pull of Florence, the heart of the Italian Renaissance. In 1504, at the age of 21, he moved to Florence, where he was exposed to the works of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. The influence of these two masters had a profound impact on Raphael's development as an artist. From Leonardo, Raphael learned how to create depth and emotion in his figures through subtle gradations of light and shadow. From Michelangelo, he gained a greater appreciation for the muscular, dynamic forms of the human body. However, rather than merely copying their styles, Raphael blended these influences with his own sense of grace and elegance. One of Raphael's most famous works from this period is the Madonna of the Goldfinch, painted around 1506. This painting, which shows the Virgin Mary with the infant Jesus and Saint John the Baptist, is a perfect example of Raphael's ability to create serene, harmonious compositions. The figures are arranged in a triangle, a composition that Raphael often used to create a sense of stability and balance. The soft, natural light and the delicate expressions on the faces of the figures give the painting a sense of calm and intimacy. The Madonna of the Goldfinch is just one of many Madonna paintings Raphael created during his time in Florence, each one displaying his mastery of form, color, and emotion. In 1508, Raphael's career took a dramatic turn when he was summoned to Rome by Pope Julius II. The Pope had ambitious plans to renovate the Vatican, and he wanted Raphael to decorate the rooms that would later become known as the Stanze di Raffaello, or the Raphael Rooms. This was a tremendous honor, and it marked the beginning of Raphael's most productive and celebrated period. The Raphael Rooms are a series of 4 rooms in the Vatican, each covered with frescoes depicting various religious and historical scenes. One of the most famous frescoes from this series is the School of Athens, painted between 1509 and 1511. The School of Athens is a masterpiece of composition and perspective, depicting a gathering of ancient philosophers and scientists, including Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, and Pythagoras. The figures are arranged in a grand architectural setting, with the vanishing point drawing the viewer's eye to the central figures of Plato and Aristotle. The painting is a celebration of human knowledge and the intellectual achievements of antiquity, and it reflects the Renaissance belief in the importance of learning and reason. What's particularly interesting about the School of Athens is that Raphael included portraits of his contemporaries in the faces of the philosophers. For example, the figure of Plato is said to resemble Leonardo da Vinci, while the figure of Heraclitus is thought to be a portrait of Michelangelo. This blending of ancient and modern figures highlights Raphael's deep respect for both the classical past and the artistic achievements of his own time. During his time in Rome, Raphael also became involved in architecture. In 1514, he was appointed chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica, following the death of the original architect, Donato Bramante. Raphael's architectural designs reflected the same principles of balance and harmony that characterized his paintings. Although he did not live to see many of his architectural projects completed, his influence on Renaissance architecture was significant. Raphael's time in Rome was incredibly busy, and he took on numerous commissions from both the Pope and private patrons. He painted portraits, altarpieces, and religious scenes, each one marked by his characteristic grace and elegance. One of his most famous portraits is that of Pope Julius II, painted in 1511. Unlike earlier papal portraits, which tended to be stiff and formal, Raphael's portrait of Julius II is remarkably lifelike and intimate. The Pope is shown seated, deep in thought, his face lined with age and care. The portrait captures both the strength and the vulnerability of one of the most powerful men of the time. Despite his immense success, Raphael's life was tragically short. He died on April 6, 1520, his 37th birthday, after a brief illness. His sudden death shocked the art world, and he was mourned by many as a grave loss to the Renaissance. Raphael was buried in the Pantheon in Rome, one of the city's most famous ancient buildings, and his tomb bears the inscription, "Here lies Raphael, by whom nature herself feared to be outdone while he lived, and when he died, feared that she herself would die." Raphael's legacy is one of beauty, harmony, and grace. His ability to create works of art that are both technically perfect and emotionally moving has made him one of the most admired artists in history. His frescoes in the Vatican, his serene Madonnas, and his masterful portraits continue to inspire artists and art lovers alike, and his influence can be seen in the works of countless painters who followed in his footsteps. Now, let's turn to another remarkable artist of the Renaissance, Donatello. While he may not be as widely known as Michelangelo or Leonardo, Donatello's contributions to sculpture were revolutionary, and he laid the groundwork for much of what came later in the Renaissance. His work is characterized by its realism, attention to detail, and innovative techniques, which set him apart as one of the great sculptors of his time. Donatello, born Donato di Niccolò di Beto Bardi, came into the world in 1386 in Florence. Florence was a vibrant center of artistic activity during the early Renaissance, and Donatello would grow up to become one of the city's leading artists. He was the son of a wool carder, but from an early age, it was clear that Donatello had a special talent for sculpture. His early training is somewhat unclear, but he likely apprenticed in a workshop that exposed him to a variety of techniques in metalworking, stone carving, and bronze casting. One of the things that made Donatello unique among his contemporaries was his ability to breathe life into his sculptures. While many artists of his time were still adhering to the stiff, formal styles of medieval art, Donatello was interested in capturing human emotion, movement, and personality. He was a pioneer in the use of contrapposto, a technique that involves depicting a figure in a more relaxed, natural pose, with one leg bearing the weight and the other slightly bent. This technique made his figures look more lifelike and dynamic, breaking away from the static, rigid forms of the past. Donatello's first major commission came in 1408 when he was asked to create a statue of David for the Cathedral of Florence. This early version of David, made of marble, was a traditional depiction of the biblical hero as a strong, confident figure. However, this was just the beginning of Donatello's exploration of the character of David. Later in his career, he would return to the subject and create one of his most famous works, a bronze statue of David that would forever change the way artists approached sculpture. Completed in the 1440s, Donatello's bronze David is considered one of the first freestanding nude statues created since ancient times. This David is strikingly different from the earlier marble version. Instead of being depicted as a muscular, heroic figure, Donatello's bronze David is a young, almost boyish figure, standing with one foot resting on the severed head of Goliath. David's body is relaxed, his posture casual, and his expression contemplative. The statue's sensuality and the use of nudity were groundbreaking for the time, and it marked a return to classical ideals of beauty and form that had not been seen in centuries. This bronze David was also revolutionary in its use of perspective. Donatello crafted the figure to be viewed from below, creating the illusion of greater height and power when seen from ground level. This attention to how the sculpture interacted with the space around it was a hallmark of Donatello's work and something that would influence many later artists, including Michelangelo. Beyond his mastery of the human form, Donatello was also a pioneer in creating emotional depth in his works. One of his most moving sculptures is the Penitent Magdalene, a wooden statue of Mary Magdalene that he created later in his life. Unlike the youthful, idealized figures of many Renaissance works, the Penitent Magdalene is depicted as a gaunt, haggard woman, her face marked by years of suffering and repentance. The stark realism of the sculpture, with its haunting expression and deeply carved lines, showcases Donatello's ability to convey raw human emotion. The statue stands in stark contrast to the idealized beauty often associated with Renaissance art and reveals Donatello's interest in the psychological and spiritual aspects of his subjects. Donatello was not only a master of bronze and wood but also an innovator in stone sculpture. His St. George, carved for the Orsanmichele in Florence, is a prime example of his ability to capture both strength and vulnerability in a single figure. The statue depicts the saint standing in a defensive posture, shield in hand, ready to face whatever challenges come his way. Yet, there is a youthful energy and a sense of anticipation in his face, suggesting that he is both brave and uncertain. This mixture of emotions is typical of Donatello's work. His figures were not one-dimensional but instead full of complexity and depth. In addition to his freestanding sculptures, Donatello also made significant contributions to relief sculpture, a form in which figures are carved into a flat surface, creating the illusion of depth. His technique, known as schiacciato, involved carving incredibly shallow reliefs that, when viewed from the right angle, created the impression of full three-dimensional space. One of the most famous examples of this technique is Donatello's Feast of Herod, a bronze relief that depicts the dramatic moment when the head of John the Baptist is presented to King Herod. The figures in this scene are arranged in such a way that they seem to recede into the distance, giving the relief a sense of depth and perspective that was revolutionary at the time. Throughout his career, Donatello worked for some of the most powerful patrons in Florence, including the influential Medici family. His association with the Medici helped to cement his reputation as one of the leading artists of his time. He was known not only for his skill as a sculptor but also for his innovative spirit and willingness to push the boundaries of what was possible in art. One of his final major works was the equestrian statue of Gattamelata, a bronze statue created for the Piazza del Santo in Padua. This monumental sculpture depicts the Venetian condottiero Erasmo da Narni, known as Gattamelata, seated on horseback, and it is notable for being one of the first equestrian statues created since antiquity. The statue's grandeur and realism set a new standard for public monuments, and it became a model for future equestrian sculptures, including those by later artists like Verrocchio and even in the Baroque period. Donatello's influence on the art world was immense, and his innovations in sculpture paved the way for the great artists of the High Renaissance. His ability to capture both physical realism and emotional depth in his works set him apart as one of the most important figures of his time. He died in 1466, but his legacy lived on through the countless artists who were inspired by his work. In many ways, Donatello was a bridge between the medieval world and the Renaissance, taking the best of both traditions and creating something entirely new. His sculptures are a testament to the power of art to express the full range of human experience, from strength and beauty to suffering and redemption. Now, let's dive into the life and works of another remarkable Renaissance artist, Titian. Born as Tiziano Vecellio around 1488 to 1490 in the small village of Pieve di Cadore in the Venetian Republic, Titian would grow to become one of the most celebrated painters of his time. Known for his mastery of color and ability to convey emotion through his works, Titian's influence extended far beyond his own lifetime, leaving an indelible mark on the history of Western art. Titian was sent to Venice at a young age to begin his artistic training. He initially studied under Gentile Bellini and later Giovanni Bellini, two of the leading painters in Venice. However, it wasn't long before Titian's talent began to stand out. By his early 20s, he had already established a reputation as a skilled painter and quickly became known for his ability to create vibrant, lifelike compositions. Unlike some of his contemporaries who focused on precise line work, Titian was more interested in the possibilities of color and light, experimenting with new techniques to bring his subjects to life. One of Titian's early masterpieces is Assumption of the Virgin, completed in 1518 for the Basilica di Santa Maria Gloriosa dei Frari in Venice. This monumental altarpiece showcases Titian's incredible skill in creating dynamic, energetic compositions. The painting depicts the Virgin Mary being taken up into heaven, surrounded by a swirling group of angels and apostles. What makes this work so remarkable is the way Titian used color to create a sense of movement and drama. The vibrant reds, blues, and golds give the painting a sense of vitality, while the contrast between light and shadow adds depth and dimension. The Assumption of the Virgin solidified Titian's reputation as one of the leading painters of Venice and set the stage for his long and illustrious career. Titian was not only a master of religious paintings, he also excelled in portraiture. His ability to capture the personality and status of his subjects made him highly sought after by the powerful and wealthy. One of his most famous portraits is Portrait of Charles V, painted in 1548. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, sits proudly on horseback, dressed in armor, with a commanding gaze. The portrait exudes power and authority, but it also reveals a sense of humanity in the way Titian painted the emperor's face. This combination of regal grandeur and subtle emotional depth made Titian's portraits stand out among his peers. Another important aspect of Titian's work was his innovative use of colorito, a technique that focused on building forms through color rather than line. This was a hallmark of the Venetian school of painting, and Titian was one of its greatest practitioners. Unlike the Florentine painters who emphasized precise drawing and form, known as disegno, Titian's approach was more fluid and atmospheric. He layered colors to create rich textures and used bold contrasts to highlight key elements in his compositions. This approach allowed him to create a sense of warmth, depth, and vibrancy that was unparalleled at the time. One of Titian's most famous mythological works is Bacchus and Ariadne, completed in 1523. The painting depicts the moment when Bacchus, the god of wine, first sees the mortal Ariadne and falls in love with her. The scene is filled with energy and movement, with Bacchus leaping from his chariot and the surrounding figures dancing in a wild frenzy. Once again, Titian's mastery of color is on full display. The bright blue sky, the lush green landscape, and the rich reds and golds of Bacchus' robes all come together to create a vivid, almost dreamlike atmosphere. This ability to blend mythology with emotion and natural beauty made Titian one of the most sought-after artists of his time. As Titian's reputation grew, he became the official painter of the Venetian Republic, and his works were commissioned by some of the most powerful rulers in Europe. He painted portraits of King Philip II of Spain, Pope Paul III, and other prominent figures of the day. His ability to convey not only the likeness but also the inner character of his subjects made his portraits highly prized. One of Titian's most notable commissions came from Philip II of Spain, who admired the artist's work immensely. For Philip, Titian painted a series of mythological scenes known as the Poesy, which included works like Danae, Venus and Adonis, and the Rape of Europa. These paintings are characterized by their sensuality, their rich use of color, and their ability to evoke emotion through the depiction of mythological stories. The Poesy series was highly influential and remains some of Titian's most celebrated works. Titian's late period saw a dramatic shift in his style. As he grew older, his brushwork became looser and more expressive. His later works are characterized by their dramatic use of light and shadow and a more emotional, almost spiritual quality. One of the most famous works from this period is the Pietà, a deeply moving depiction of the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Christ. The painting was intended to be placed on Titian's tomb, but it was unfinished at the time of his death in 1576 and was completed by one of his pupils. The Pietà showcases the depth of emotion that Titian was able to convey through his art, even in his final years. Titian's later years were marked by personal loss and the challenges of old age, but he continued to paint until the very end of his life. His last works are filled with a sense of introspection and a deep understanding of the human condition. While his early works are known for their vibrant colors and dynamic compositions, his later paintings reflect a more subdued, reflective tone. This evolution in his style speaks to Titian's ability to grow as an artist and adapt to new ideas, even in the final stages of his career. Titian's influence on the world of art cannot be overstated. His mastery of color, his ability to capture human emotion, and his innovative techniques had a profound impact on generations of artists. Painters like Velázquez, Rubens, and Rembrandt all admired and were influenced by Titian's work. His legacy lives on in the countless artists who have been inspired by his use of color and his ability to convey the complexities of human emotion through painting. In many ways, Titian was the bridge between the Renaissance and the Baroque period. His work embodies the spirit of the Renaissance, celebrating beauty, emotion, and the human experience, while also paving the way for the dramatic, emotional intensity of Baroque art. Titian's contributions to the world of art are immense, and his works continue to be celebrated and studied by art lovers and scholars alike. Now, let's explore the life and works of Sandro Botticelli, one of the most beloved and recognizable artists of the Renaissance. Born Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filippi in Florence in 1445, Botticelli is known for his graceful, delicate figures and his ethereal approach to mythological and religious themes. His works often feel like they belong to a dreamlike world, filled with beauty, mystery, and elegance. Botticelli's early life is somewhat obscure, but we know that he was the youngest of 4 sons and was apprenticed to the painter Fra Filippo Lippi, one of the most prominent Florentine painters of the time. Under Lippi's tutelage, Botticelli developed a style that combined the naturalism of the early Renaissance with a more decorative and linear approach. Lippi's influence can be seen in Botticelli's graceful figures, soft contours, and exquisite attention to detail. One of Botticelli's earliest major commissions came in the late 1470s when he was asked to paint a series of frescoes in the Sistine Chapel in Rome, alongside other leading artists of the day. Although these works are often overshadowed by Michelangelo's later Sistine Chapel ceiling, Botticelli's frescoes are significant in their own right, showcasing his mastery of composition and his ability to convey complex religious themes with clarity and grace. But it is Botticelli's mythological paintings that have truly cemented his place in art history. Perhaps the most famous of all is The Birth of Venus, painted around 1485. This iconic painting depicts the goddess Venus emerging from the sea on a shell, surrounded by figures from classical mythology. The composition is simple yet incredibly striking. Venus stands in the center, her flowing hair and delicate form set against a backdrop of sky and sea. What makes this painting so remarkable is the way Botticelli captures the beauty and serenity of the scene. The figures seem almost weightless, floating in a world of calm and tranquility. The soft, flowing lines and the harmonious color palette give the painting a dreamlike quality that has captivated viewers for centuries. The Birth of Venus is often seen as a celebration of both classical mythology and human beauty, reflecting the Renaissance ideals of harmony, proportion, and grace. It is also a reflection of the influence of Neoplatonism, a philosophical movement that sought to reconcile classical paganism with Christian theology. In this painting, Venus can be interpreted not just as a symbol of physical beauty but as a representation of divine love and spiritual purity. Botticelli's ability to infuse his works with both aesthetic beauty and deeper philosophical meaning is one of the reasons he is so revered. Another of Botticelli's masterpieces is Primavera, or Allegory of Spring, painted around 1482. This large panel painting depicts a garden filled with mythological figures, including Venus, the three Graces, Mercury, and Flora, the goddess of flowers. The scene is filled with movement and life, as flowers bloom, figures dance, and the world seems to awaken from winter into spring. Like The Birth of Venus, Primavera is rich with symbolism and can be interpreted on multiple levels. Some scholars believe it represents the Neoplatonic idea of the soul's journey toward enlightenment, while others see it as an allegory of love, fertility, and renewal. What is undeniable, however, is the sheer beauty of the painting. Botticelli's attention to detail, the delicate flowers, the flowing garments, the graceful poses of the figures, creates a sense of harmony and balance that is mesmerizing. In addition to his mythological works, Botticelli was also a master of religious painting. One of his most famous religious works is the Adoration of the Magi, painted in 1475. This painting, commissioned by the Medici family, depicts the biblical scene of the three wise men presenting gifts to the infant Jesus. However, What makes this work particularly interesting is that Botticelli included portraits of members of the Medici family, including Cosimo de' Medici, Piero the Gouty, and Giuliano de' Medici, within the composition. By placing these powerful figures alongside the Holy Family, Botticelli not only honored his patrons but also made a statement about the Medici family's role as benefactors of Florence and champions of the arts. Botticelli's portraits, like his larger works, are marked by their elegance and attention to detail. His subjects are often depicted with idealized features, soft skin tones, and a calm, serene expression. One of his most famous portraits is Portrait of a Young Man, painted around 1483. The sitter, dressed in rich clothing and with a thoughtful expression, embodies the Renaissance ideal of the cultured, refined individual. The portrait is not just a representation of physical likeness, but also a reflection of the sitter's character and inner life. This ability to capture both the outward appearance and the inner spirit of his subjects is one of the reasons Botticelli's portraits continue to be admired. Despite his success, Botticelli's later years were marked by a decline in his fortunes. As the political climate in Florence changed, so too did the demand for the kinds of mythological and decorative works that had made Botticelli famous. The rise of the fanatical preacher Savonarola, who denounced the secular art and culture of the time, had a profound impact on Florence's artistic community. Some historians believe that Botticelli may have even destroyed some of his own works in the infamous bonfire of the Vanities, a public burning of objects deemed sinful or indulgent. In the final years of his life, Botticelli's style became more introspective and somber. His later religious works, such as the Mystical Nativity, 1500, reflect a shift away from the classical ideals of beauty and harmony that had defined his earlier work. Instead, these paintings are marked by a heightened emotional intensity and a deeper focus on spiritual themes. The Mystical Nativity is a particularly unusual work, filled with symbolic imagery and a sense of apocalyptic urgency. It is thought to have been influenced by the religious fervor of Savonarola's teachings, and it represents a significant departure from the graceful, idealized figures of Botticelli's earlier career. Botticelli died in 1510, largely forgotten by his contemporaries. His style had fallen out of favor, overshadowed by the monumental works of Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael. However, his legacy was revived in the 19th century, when the Pre-Raphaelite movement rediscovered and celebrated his works for their beauty, grace, and emotional depth. Today, Botticelli is regarded as one of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, and his works continue to captivate audiences around the world. Botticelli's art, with its delicate lines, graceful figures, and symbolic depth, remains timeless. His ability to merge the ideals of classical beauty with the emotional and spiritual complexity of the human experience is what makes his work so special. Whether through the ethereal beauty of the birth of Venus or the rich symbolism of Primavera, Botticelli's paintings continue to inspire awe and admiration more than 500 years after they were created. Now, let's explore one of the earliest and most influential figures of the Renaissance, Giotto di Bondone, often simply known as Giotto. Born in 1267 in the village of Cal di Vespignano, near Florence, Giotto is widely considered one of the founding fathers of the Renaissance. He revolutionized painting by introducing a more naturalistic style, breaking away from the stiff, formal, and often flat figures of medieval art. His innovations laid the groundwork for the later masters of the Renaissance, making him a key figure in the transition from the medieval world to the modern age. According to legend, Giotto's talent was discovered when he was still a young shepherd boy. It's said that the famous painter Cimabue came across Giotto drawing pictures of his sheep on rocks and was so impressed by the boy's skill that he took him on as an apprentice. Whether or not this story is true, what is certain is that Giotto did train under Cimabue, one of the leading artists of the time, and quickly surpassed his master in both skill and fame. At the heart of Giotto's genius was his ability to bring a new level of realism to his paintings. Before Giotto, most medieval art was highly stylized and symbolic, with little attention given to naturalism or the accurate representation of human figures. Faces were often emotionless, and the proportions of bodies were distorted to fit religious or symbolic conventions. Giotto, however, sought to change all of that. He introduced a greater sense of volume, weight, and emotion to his figures, making them look more like real people and less like icons. One of Giotto's most famous works is the Scrovegni Chapel, also known as the Arena Chapel, in Padua. Painted between 1303 and 1305, the chapel is covered with frescoes depicting scenes from the life of Christ and the Virgin Mary. The Scrovegni Chapel is often hailed as one of the greatest achievements of Western art, not only because of the beauty of the individual frescoes, but also because of the way Giotto created a cohesive narrative that guides the viewer through the story of salvation. The scenes are filled with emotion and drama, and Giotto's use of light and shadow gives the figures a sense of three-dimensionality that was unprecedented at the time. One of the most striking frescoes in the chapel is the Lamentation, which depicts the aftermath of Christ's crucifixion. In this scene, Giotto masterfully conveys the grief and sorrow of the figures gathered around Christ's lifeless body. The Virgin Mary cradles her son, her face filled with anguish, while others weep and mourn in the background. What sets this work apart is the way Giotto captures the emotional intensity of the moment. The figures are not just passive observers, they are fully engaged in the scene, their faces and gestures expressing a range of deep emotions. This focus on human emotion was a radical departure from the more abstract, symbolic approach of earlier medieval art. Giotto also made significant advancements in the use of perspective. While true linear perspective wouldn't be fully developed until the later Renaissance, Giotto took important steps in creating the illusion of depth in his paintings. He carefully arranged the figures in his compositions to create a sense of space, using overlapping forms and foreshortening to suggest that some figures were closer to the viewer than others. This was a major innovation at the time and helped to create a more realistic, naturalistic view of the world. Another of Giotto's major works is the frescoes of the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. These frescoes, painted in the late 1290s, depict scenes from the life of St. Francis of Assisi and are among Giotto's earliest known works. The frescoes in the upper basilica are divided into a series of panels, each illustrating a key event in St. Francis's life. Here again, Giotto's ability to create lifelike figures and convey human emotion shines through. The scenes are filled with a sense of humanity and compassion, reflecting the teachings of St. Francis, who emphasized love, humility, and the dignity of all living things. Giotto's influence extended far beyond his own lifetime. His innovative approach to painting inspired generations of artists who followed, including some of the greatest masters of the Renaissance, such as Masaccio, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci. In fact, Vasari, the famous Renaissance art historian, credited Giotto with setting painting on its rightful course and praised him for breaking away from the rigid, formulaic style of medieval art. One of Giotto's most notable contributions was his use of chiaroscuro, the technique of using light and shadow to create the illusion of volume in a figure or object. While this technique would be further developed by later artists like Caravaggio and Rembrandt, Giotto was one of the first painters to explore the potential of light and shadow in creating a more realistic representation of the human form. This was particularly evident in his frescoes, where the play of light on the figures' robes and faces gives them a sense of solidity and weight. Despite his groundbreaking work, Giotto remained deeply rooted in the religious traditions of his time. His art was not just about innovation for innovation's sake, it was about bringing the stories of the Bible and the lives of the saints to life in a way that would move and inspire viewers. He believed that art had a moral and spiritual purpose, and he sought to use his skills to elevate the souls of those who looked upon his works. Later in his career, Giotto was appointed the chief architect of Florence's cathedral, known as Santa Maria del Fiore, or simply the Duomo. While Giotto's contributions to architecture were not as revolutionary as his work in painting, he did design the famous bell tower, or campanile, that stands next to the cathedral. The Giotto's campanile, as it's called today, is a beautifully proportioned tower adorned with intricate carvings and reliefs. Although Giotto did not live to see the tower completed, his design set the standard for the elegant, harmonious architecture that would come to define the Renaissance. Giotto died in 1337, but his legacy continued to grow in the centuries that followed. His frescoes and paintings were admired not only for their technical skill but also for their emotional depth and spiritual power. Giotto had a profound influence on the development of Western art, helping to usher in a new era of realism, humanism, and naturalism that would define the Renaissance. In many ways, Giotto's work represents the beginning of the Renaissance. He was a transitional figure, bridging the gap between the medieval world and the new, human-centered worldview of the Renaissance. His ability to bring biblical stories to life in a way that was both emotionally moving and visually compelling set the stage for the artistic achievements of the next 2 centuries. Today, Giotto is remembered not only as a great artist but as a pioneer whose innovations helped shape the course of art history. Let's now turn our attention to Peter Bruegel the Elder, a remarkable artist whose works offer a vivid glimpse into the lives, struggles, and joys of ordinary people during the Renaissance. Born around 1525 in what is now Belgium, Bruegel was a master of both landscape and genre painting, and his works are notable for their attention to detail, humor, and moral commentary. He is often considered one of the most important painters of the Northern Renaissance, and his influence can be seen in the works of many later artists, including his own sons, Peter Bruegel the Younger and Jan Bruegel the Elder. Unlike many of his contemporaries, who focused on religious or mythological themes, Bruegel's work was largely centered on the everyday lives of peasants and common folk. His paintings are filled with scenes of festivals, work, play, and nature, often depicted with a keen eye for detail and a deep understanding of human behavior. Through these seemingly simple scenes, Bruegel explored complex themes such as human folly, the passage of time, and the relationship between man and nature. One of Bruegel's most famous works is The Hunters in the Snow, painted in 1565 as part of a series depicting the different seasons of the year. This winter scene shows a group of hunters returning to their village after a day's hunt, with snow-covered fields, frozen rivers, and distant mountains in the background. The painting is celebrated for its atmospheric quality and its ability to convey the cold, still beauty of winter. Yet, there is also a sense of quiet struggle in the figures of the hunters, whose downcast faces and empty hands suggest that the day has not been successful. Bruegel's use of perspective draws the viewer's eye into the distance, creating a sense of vast, open space, while the careful detailing of the landscape and figures gives the scene a sense of realism and immediacy. But Bruegel was not only interested in capturing the beauty of nature, his work often included a sharp social commentary. Another of his most famous works, The Peasant Wedding, 1567, is a lively and detailed portrayal of a rustic wedding feast. In this painting, Bruegel offers a joyful, bustling scene of peasants gathered to celebrate, with food, drink, and music flowing freely. However, beneath the surface, there are hints of critique. The peasants, with their exaggerated features and lively gestures, are depicted with both affection and humor, but Bruegel also subtly comments on the excess and disorder of the celebration. The bride, seated passively at the center of the composition, seems almost detached from the chaos around her, while the guests greedily devour their food, unaware of her. This mixture of celebration and critique is typical of Bruegel's approach. He had a deep empathy for his subjects, but was also keenly aware of the flaws and follies of human nature. Bruegel's ability to blend humor and moral commentary is perhaps best seen in his famous painting The Fight Between Carnival and Lent, 1559. This complex and crowded scene depicts a symbolic battle between the forces of excess, represented by the figure of Carnival, a jolly man riding a barrel, and piety, represented by Lent, a gaunt figure with a fish. The painting is filled with a dizzying array of characters, each engaged in their own small dramas, from revelers enjoying the excesses of Carnival to devout figures practicing their Lenten abstinence. The work is a visual feast, full of color, movement, and energy, but it also offers a pointed commentary on the conflict between indulgence and restraint, a theme that was particularly relevant in the religious climate of 16th century Europe. One of Bruegel's most striking qualities was his ability to depict large crowds while giving each figure a distinct personality. This is evident in works such as the Tower of Babel, 1563, where hundreds of tiny figures are shown laboring to construct the biblical tower. The monumental tower itself dominates the composition, rising into the sky in a spiraling, almost impossible structure. The scene is filled with activity, as workers and engineers toil away, but there is also a sense of impending doom. The Tower of Babel, of course, is a symbol of human ambition and pride, and Bruegel's depiction of it captures both the scale of the endeavor and the futility of its purpose. The painting serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreaching and the limits of human power. Another important aspect of Bruegel's work is his interest in moral allegory. In his painting The Blind Leading the Blind, 1568, Bruegel illustrates the biblical proverb, "If the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch." The painting shows a group of blind men linked together and stumbling forward, with the lead figure already tumbling into a ditch. The figures are rendered with meticulous detail, their ragged clothing and worn faces suggesting a life of hardship. Yet, despite their individual struggles, they are united in their collective fate, heading toward disaster. The painting is a powerful allegory about the dangers of ignorance and the importance of guidance and wisdom. Like much of Bruegel's work, it combines a sense of realism with a deeper, moral message. Bruegel's landscapes, too, are more than just backdrops for his figures, they play an active role in his storytelling. In works like The Harvesters, 1565, Bruegel captures the rhythms of rural life, with peasants harvesting grain in the foreground while others rest or eat in the shade of a tree. The vast, rolling landscape stretches out behind them, giving a sense of the endless cycle of nature and human labor. Bruegel's attention to detail, the way the sunlight falls on the golden fields, the way the figures bend and stretch as they work, creates a vivid, almost tactile sense of place. Yet, there is also a sense of the larger forces at play, as the changing seasons and the cycles of nature are depicted with the same care and importance as the human figures. Despite the often humorous or light-hearted tone of his works, Bruegel was also capable of exploring darker themes. His painting The Triumph of Death, 1562, is a chilling reminder of the fragility of life. The painting depicts an apocalyptic scene in which an army of skeletons lays waste to a desolate landscape. Death is everywhere, as skeletons drag the living to their doom, set fire to buildings, and even play music in a grotesque parody of life. The painting is filled with horror and chaos, but it also offers a stark commentary on the inevitability of death and the futility of human endeavor in the face of mortality. It is one of Bruegel's most haunting works, and it reveals the depth and range of his artistic vision. Peter Bruegel the Elder died in 1569, but his legacy lived on through his sons, particularly Peter Bruegel the Younger, who continued to paint in his father's style. However, it is the elder Bruegel who is remembered as one of the great masters of the Northern Renaissance. His ability to capture the complexity of human life, its joys, its struggles, its follies, set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Bruegel's works are not just beautiful images, they are windows into the human condition, filled with insight, humor, and wisdom. Through his vivid landscapes, bustling scenes of peasant life, and thought-provoking moral allegories, Bruegel's art continues to resonate with viewers today. His ability to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, and to comment on the deeper truths of human existence through seemingly simple scenes, makes him one of the most fascinating and enduring artists of the Renaissance. Let's move on to the unique and fascinating artist known as El Greco, one of the most distinctive painters of the Renaissance. Born Dominikos Theotokopoulos in 1541 on the Greek island of Crete, El Greco, which means the Greek, became famous for his highly individual style that blended Byzantine, Renaissance, and Mannerist elements. His works are known for their elongated figures, intense emotionality, and dramatic use of color and light. El Greco's art transcended the conventions of his time, and his influence extended far beyond the Renaissance, inspiring later movements such as Expressionism and Cubism. El Greco's early years in Crete were shaped by the island's Byzantine artistic traditions. He was trained as an icon painter, learning to depict religious subjects with the flat, stylized figures and gold backgrounds characteristic of Byzantine art. This early training would have a lasting impact on El Greco's style, even after he left Crete and was exposed to the artistic innovations of the Italian Renaissance. In 1567, at the age of 26, El Greco moved to Venice, then one of the great artistic centers of Europe. There, he studied the works of Renaissance masters like Titian and Tintoretto, absorbing their use of color, composition, and perspective. However, even as El Greco adopted the techniques of the Italian Renaissance, he never fully abandoned the Byzantine influences of his youth. This fusion of styles, Byzantine iconography with Venetian color and form, created something entirely new and deeply personal. El Greco's work became a unique blend of Eastern and Western traditions, characterized by its spiritual intensity and bold experimentation. One of El Greco's earliest masterpieces is The Miracle of Christ Healing the Blind, 1570, painted during his time in Venice. This painting demonstrates his mastery of Venetian color and light, with rich, deep hues and dramatic contrasts between light and shadow. The figures, though more naturalistic than his later works, already shows signs of the elongated proportions and expressive gestures that would become hallmarks of El Greco's style. The scene itself, in which Christ heals a blind man, is infused with a sense of divine energy and spiritual drama. The figures seem to be caught in a moment of intense emotion, their movements fluid and almost theatrical. In 1577, El Greco moved to Spain, where he would spend the rest of his life and create some of his most famous works. He settled in Toledo, a city known for its religious and cultural significance, and quickly gained a reputation as one of the leading painters in Spain. It was in Toledo that El Greco fully developed his mature style, a style that broke away from the classical ideals of the Renaissance and moved towards something more spiritual, emotional, and expressive. One of El Greco's most famous works from this period is the Burial of the Count of Orgaz, 1586, a large altarpiece commissioned for the Church of Santo Tomé in Toledo. The painting depicts a miraculous event in which Saint Stephen and Saint Augustine descend from heaven to assist in the burial of Count Orgaz, a pious man known for his charity. The lower half of the painting is grounded in the earthly world, with figures dressed in rich, realistic detail, while the upper half depicts the heavenly realm, with elongated, almost ethereal figures ascending into the clouds. The contrast between the two realms is striking, and El Greco's use of color, golden yellows, deep blues, and luminous whites, creates a sense of divine light and spiritual transcendence. In the Burial of the Count of Orgaz, El Greco's mastery of composition is evident. The painting is divided into two distinct sections, the earthly and the divine, but the two are seamlessly connected by the flowing gestures and upward gazes of the figures. The elongated forms, especially in the heavenly figures, lend the scene a sense of weightlessness and otherworldliness, as if the viewer is witnessing something beyond the physical world. The emotional intensity of the figures, with their expressive faces and dramatic gestures, gives the painting a powerful spiritual energy. This work is considered one of El Greco's greatest masterpieces and a defining example of his unique approach to religious art. El Greco's distinctive style became even more pronounced in his later works. He began to elongate his figures to an almost unnatural degree, creating compositions that felt dreamlike and transcendent. His use of color became more daring, with bold contrasts and unexpected combinations that heighten the emotional impact of his paintings. This can be seen in works such as The Agony in the Garden, 1590, where the figures of Christ and the angels are stretched vertically, their flowing robes swirling around them in a way that defies gravity. The sky behind them is filled with dramatic clouds, painted in deep purples and fiery oranges, creating a sense of cosmic turmoil that reflects the spiritual anguish of the scene. El Greco's work often focused on religious themes, but he also created a number of powerful portraits. His portraits are characterized by their psychological depth and intensity, as seen in his portrait of a cardinal, 1600. The subject, dressed in rich red robes, is captured in a moment of quiet reflection, his eyes gazing directly at the viewer with an almost penetrating intensity. El Greco's use of light and shadow gives the portrait a sense of depth and realism, but the elongated face and expressive brushstrokes give it an emotional resonance that goes beyond mere physical likeness. In his portraits, as in his religious works, El Greco sought to capture not just the outward appearance of his subjects, but their inner lives and spiritual essence. One of the most striking aspects of El Greco's style is his use of Mannerist techniques. Mannerism, which emerged in the late Renaissance, was characterized by its rejection of classical ideals of proportion and balance in favor of exaggerated forms and dramatic compositions. El Greco embraced these elements, pushing them to new extremes in his work. His figures often seem to defy the laws of nature, with elongated limbs, twisted poses, and swirling drapery that creates a sense of movement and tension. His compositions are often asymmetrical and dynamic, with bold diagonals and unexpected juxtapositions of figures in space. This departure from classical realism allowed El Greco to create works that were more emotionally charged and spiritually intense. Despite his unconventional style, El Greco was highly respected during his lifetime, particularly in Spain. His work was admired for its spiritual depth and technical skill, and he received numerous commissions from both religious and secular patrons. However, after his death in 1614, his work fell out of favor as the more restrained, classical styles of the Baroque period took hold. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that El Greco's work was rediscovered and appreciated for its originality and emotional power. Today, El Greco is celebrated as one of the most innovative and visionary artists of the Renaissance. His unique style, with its blend of Byzantine, Venetian, and Mannerist influences, set him apart from his contemporaries and paved the way for later artistic movements. His dramatic use of color, light, and form had a profound impact on the development of modern art, influencing painters such as Edouard Manet, Paul Cézanne, and Pablo Picasso. El Greco's ability to convey spiritual and emotional truths through his highly personal style makes his work timeless. His paintings are not just religious icons, they are expressions of the human soul, filled with passion, faith, and transcendence. Whether in his dramatic religious scenes, his haunting portraits, or his visionary landscapes, El Greco's work continues to captivate and inspire viewers today. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the lives and works of some of the most remarkable artists of the Renaissance. From the bold innovations of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to the unique visions of El Greco and Botticelli, these artists not only shaped the world of art but also influenced the way we see the world today. Their works continue to inspire, provoke, and captivate us, even centuries after their time. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the Renaissance masters. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which artist resonates with you the most? I'd love to hear your opinions. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the beauty of art and history.